Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to let a few more attendees have a minute to join, and then we'll be getting started. Thanks for coming. Welcome, everyone, to today's meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. You have joined the webinar for the Partnership for Downtown Rochester, the discussion of the Business Improvement District Effort community meeting. And my name is Nancy Reka. I am with Highland Planning, and I am joined today by folks from the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation, Galen Brooks and John Connors, as well as Brian from BDS Planning and Urban Design. And you'll be hearing from all of them as we get going here. First off, though, I would like to introduce Miguel Melendez from City Council and ask him to give a few words of welcome. Thanks, Miguel.
Thanks, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Business Improvement District Community Meeting. It is great to see the community engagement continue. As I and all of my council colleagues have expressed at various points, we are interested in hearing from our constituents about downtown Rochester and the vision for downtown Rochester. I would like to thank the Partnership for Downtown Rochester and the team for organizing this session, as well as Highland Planning for organizing this public meeting, which is one of two public meetings happening today. And I'm encouraged by the overall level of interest and participation in the process. For me, it's critically important that we hear from the people residing downtown. I am hopeful we will continue to get more voices from the most impacted community as we continue the process. Hearing from business operators is also important, as we have many anchor businesses that we want to continue to support Center City. Property owners and visitors also have a very important voice as we continue to create the right amenities to support and sustain the efforts downtown. This process of community engagement, what you want to see and what you don't want to see, is very important. It is my hope that we continue to have honest and tough conversations. The viability and variation of what is possible is dependent on your input, and I'm here as an observer of the process, and I look forward to listening to your feedback today. With that, I'll turn it over to Highland Planning and Nancy to move us along in the process, and I look forward to listening in. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay, so just a quick review of our agenda for today. We will be starting with a presentation from Galen and Brian about what bids are and some examples from other cities. Then we're going to be doing a couple of engagement activities where we want to get your input, and then it'll be followed by a Q&A period. And I just want to note that as we go through, we are here to hear your input. We want to engage with you and hear your thoughts about this. So we really are glad you're here today and look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I will turn it over to Galen. And I think, Mike, you can advance to the next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, President Melendez, for your leadership in this effort and sharing your wisdom and well-earned expertise in community engagement and visioning and strategic planning with a place-based lens. So as has been shared, we're here today to talk about the downtown core of Rochester, what you see is working, not working, what you want it to do and be in the future. And this work is part of an effort to form a potential business improvement district for downtown. This is work that can't be effective without you, the people who live, work, and visit the downtown core of Rochester. So thank you again for being here and for sharing your voice and for getting involved. We've heard and know that community engagement is really important here, and so have centered this process around it, which is why we're here today, kicking off our formal community engagement process. As has also been shared, my name is Galen Brooks. I am the president and CEO of the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation and also the executive director of the Partnership for Downtown Rochester. So who are those organizations? Before I hand it over to BDS Planning and Urban Design, national expert in this work and the consultants on this effort, I wanted to take a minute to share a little bit about who we are, why we're here, and the work we've been doing to date. RDDC, the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation, is a 4 decades old org that has been serving in support of the economic vitality of downtown Rochester with core values of excellence, integrity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and sustainability. Working as a steward of the downtown economy and to expand opportunity, jobs, and homegrown innovation in the heart of our city, RDDC also established the commissary in 2022, which supports 60 plus small and local food and beverage businesses with shared kitchen space and incubation services. More recently formed, the Partnership for Downtown Rochester was set up to help oversee activities to animate and promote the downtown core and newly created riverfront spaces on the Genesee River. It was also set up to help oversee this effort for a potential business improvement district in the downtown core. This organization, the Partnership for Downtown Rochester, is led by a board of elected officials, nonprofit leaders, and property owners. And PDR, Partnership for Downtown Rochester, contracts with RDDC to carry out its day-to-day services. Next slide, please. So why now? There are 2 key needs that initiated this effort. One is simply the reality of the present moment. It isn't news to anyone here that downtowns across the country have been thrust into challenging new conditions as a result of the pandemic. Remote work is a new reality, and spaces and places like downtown Rochester are feeling the effects of that. Business improvement districts happen when property owners choose to pool new resources to fund new programs and services in a given geography. They're tried and true tools that can help combat disinvestment in the urban core, build on pre-existing energy and enthusiasm, and facilitate growth and recovery. The second reason we're here today is the main factor that initiated this effort. It's Rock the Riverway. This initiative, which is underway right now in phase 1, is bringing 13 projects to the Genesee Riverfront. One such project that was noted was to form a management entity for the newly created spaces on the Genesee Riverfront in downtown. But that plan didn't say which type of entity. So there was a city-led study that evaluated the possibilities and recommended a business improvement district as best suited because of its reliable structure and emphasis on partnerships and collaboration. Next slide, please. For the last few months, and indeed today, this effort has been focusing on community engagement to ensure a community-informed process and a rich understanding of what the community wants from its downtown. We've made community engagement the top priority for this effort. Starting last fall, we launched several grassroots community engagement activities with monthly office hours and workshops, and a community survey which garnered 550 plus responses. The data gathered from these activities is ongoing and will help inform the vision a future bid could help fulfill upon. To date, there have been 13 in-person events and 5 tabling events at residential buildings. Of note, on workshops and at in-person engagements, we've heard a lot about the need for more amenities, things to do and see, and neighborhoods serving retail like grocery stores and pharmacies. We've also heard a lot about the desire for more plantings, better care of public spaces and sidewalks, and improved pedestrian safety. The survey conducted in the fall, full details of which are online and will be available at the community meeting tonight, showed that respondents gave dining and eating out high marks, but shopping and convenience showed room for growth in the downtown core. Respondents also shared that there was room for improvement in public spaces with low ratings for plantings, green space and seating, and perceptions of vacancy and cleanliness. Next slide, please. Before I hand it off to BDS, I also want to take a minute to share with you the timeline for this process as it stands from here. As I've shared, we've just begun the formal community engagement process, and in the months ahead, we'll be working through more community engagement to better understand and define a vision for the downtown core that this effort can help fulfill upon. As you can see, we're at the stage with community meeting 1 in spring 2023, and those of you who are familiar with the community engagement plan released last month will recognize much of this content. With a heavy push on community engagement now and continuing through the summer, and the next community meeting planned for this summer. So stay tuned, as there'll be updates of that in the coming months. The plan is to build towards a community-informed draft proposal for a potential business improvement district this summer that will go through several revisions, and then the New York State required legislative process. Next slide, please. So with that, I would like to say thank you. This is a long and layered process with community engagement and input at the heart of it. It's foundational to its ability to be responsive to community needs, priorities, and preferences. I'll hand it over now to Brian with BDS to talk more about the many different ways the business improvement districts can serve their areas and help fulfill upon community-defined visions. Thank you, Brian.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Scott with BDS Planning. I've been working on downtown revitalization and management for as long as those things have been a regular activity. My role today is to share a bit about what business improvement districts are and what they do. Next slide, please. I founded BDS Planning 15 years ago after 25 years of work in comprehensive community development in cities of all sizes in many different states, largely focused on downtown and neighborhood revitalization efforts. To date, we've worked in 15 states over 40 years. Next slide, please. Successful revitalization, in my experience, requires economic fundamentals, design and development principles, sustained marketing and promotions, and perhaps most importantly, strong leadership and consistent management. All those ingredients coming together to make downtowns and districts vital, exciting, a great place to be. The good news about business improvement districts is they can pay for all of these activities. Next slide. Vitality depends on quality marketing and promotions, environmental services like sweeping the sidewalks, removing graffiti, hospitality and safety, letting people know that they're welcome, helping them find their way around, making sure they feel safe because they can see people that are there to support them, retail and business strategies to help the street level businesses thrive and create the sizzle on the activity in downtown, planning and design improvements to create a great environment, and strong management to pull all those things together and have them work in sync. Again, business improvement districts are a way to pay for all of these activities. Next slide. So what is a business improvement district? That's a funny phrase because they're really about, they'd be better called downtown management districts or something, but that's the name that caught on several decades ago. It's simply a funding mechanism. It's enacted by the city council. It's an assessment on properties and or businesses in a specific area. How the assessment done is a local preference, and it's different in one state to the next, and one city to the next, one neighborhood to the next. But it could be based on square footage, property value, sales, or other equitable assessment mechanisms. Perhaps the strongest feature of it is they are managed in the neighborhood. That is, it's not the city, it's not a big government entity, but it's managed by the people who have the most to gain and have the most vested interest in the area where they're created. What the money is used for is also a local preference. The most common things that I've seen are maintenance, like sweeping and graffiti removal, hospitality and safety, environmental services, marketing and promotions, community events, and so forth. Next slide. A lot of this notion of how these districts work and the activities they do grew out of a work from William White and a number of his colleagues in New York City in the 1970s. He published a book called The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. And based on countless hours of observation of public spaces, they concluded that pedestrian-centric design elements like benches and trees and things like that are not enough to attract users and make them feel comfortable, but rather you need deliberate programming and ways to encourage human interaction like food and games and interaction to give the space life, which is fundamental to much of the place management industry today. And you see parks all over the country with concierges that are activating public space, like this fellow putting out the pieces of a chessboard in a public park. Next slide. This whole industry grew up originally in response to the decline of America's downtowns after the Second World War, when the GI Bill and the interstate highway system created a lot of the suburbanization that happened. Urban renewal and redlining kind of ruined a lot of the historic and culturally and racially rich neighborhoods of our inner cities. By the 1960s, downtowns started organizing to try to respond and not just give up on the life where they'd been the center of communities forever. By the 1970s, partly because of the work that I just gave an overview of, this turned into public area management, mostly on physical improvements and physical maintenance of public space. And then by the 1980s and 1990s, this turned into assessment districts, which are often called business improvement districts. Their original focus was mostly on cleaning, like again, sweeping the sidewalks, graffiti removal, having some sort of ambassadors or uniform presence on the street to make people feel better and get directions and things like that. By the 2000s, it got more, wasn't just downtowns, it was neighborhoods. There was much more public space programming, and these districts got much more into social service support activities to help everybody feel like downtown was their neighborhood and make everybody feel safe and cared for in the downtown. Today, there are thousands of these place management districts across the country. I'd like to share just a few of those to give you a kind of a quick smattering of what they do. Next slide. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they have a district that was created in 1997. Today, it has a budget of about $9 million. They do professional management, environmental services, outreach and hospitality, economic development, transportation, marketing, promotion, and events. You can see this screenshot from their website with a downtown directory of all the things they're already doing downtown Pittsburgh. Next slide. In Spokane, Washington, a city about the same size as Rochester, they created a district in 1995. It has a budget of about 1.2 million. They do professional management. They have ambassadors, uniformed ambassadors on the sidewalk, marketing and promotions, parking and transportation, maintenance services, special events, and economic development support. Next slide. In downtown Washington, D.C., they have a district created in 1997. It's one of the bigger ones in the country, budget of about $15 million. Professional management, environmental services, hospitality and safety, homeless services, public space, transportation, economic development. And DC is a great example of how these districts have evolved. The picture on the top there is the Downtown Day Services Center in the downtown DC district, which is a place for folks that are experiencing homelessness to drop in, get a meal, get warm or cool, depending on the season. They can get help if they choose with doing their laundry. They can take a shower. They can talk to a case manager who might help them find housing. It's a comprehensive services to support people experiencing homelessness in that district. Next slide. Berkeley, California, another city about the same size as Rochester in a larger urban area. Their district created in 1990 has a budget just under $2 million. They do professional management, clean and beautification, hospitality and outreach, marketing and business support. Next slide. In Chicago, the iconic Chicago Loop created a district in 2005. They have a budget of about $5 million. Professional management, environmental services, hospitality and safety, beautification, economic development, marketing and events. They're the folks that turn the river green in St. Patrick's Day. You can see there's a theme here with the kind of activities that are supported. Next slide. A neighborhood in Seattle, Washington, where we helped create the district in 2014. They have a budget of about $2 million. It's a formerly industrial neighborhood just south of downtown Seattle. You can see downtown Seattle in the background of this slide. In the foreground is the Starbucks World Headquarters. They do similar services in a very different feeling kind of district. Professional management, environmental services, hospitality and safety, similar stuff. They also did an amazing project along the light rail line that goes through there, where they worked with a local nonprofit that helps youth and professional artists develop work, and they've created many dozen murals and won several awards for this incredible gateway into a kind of gritty neighborhood with lots of public art. Next slide. The University City District in Philadelphia, which is where the University of Pennsylvania and Drexel University are, has a district created in '97, a budget of about $11 million plus a number of large capital projects. They do similar services. One of the things I wanted to highlight here is they have a really focused job training program to help people who are economically disadvantaged to have training in jobs and find employment. And they've placed hundreds of people into jobs over the last decade. Next slide. Another neighborhood in Seattle created the district in 2015. They have a budget of about $500,000. They do similar services there. One of the things that they're particularly proud of is when the pandemic started, they really worked hard with the city of Seattle to dramatically change the city's code to allow the streeteries out on the sidewalk where people could eat outside. And the program has been so successful that they've kept them after the pandemic has subsided. Next slide. In Memphis, Tennessee, they have a district started in '97, a $3 million budget. One thing that really stuck out about their program for me was a very active small business support development loan program where independent minority entrepreneurs can get low interest loans and grants to build out their space and get into business with less capital than they would have to otherwise. Next slide. In Central City, Philadelphia, probably the biggest and most respected district in the country, founded in 1991 with a $30 million budget, similar services, and they're another program that is doing great work with trying to provide case management and outreach services for people experiencing homeless. This is a couple of their ambassadors who are trained social workers going out and helping try to help the folks that are living out on the street find the services that they need. Next slide. In Houston, they have a sizable district started in '95 with an $18 million budget. They have a particularly noteworthy program of street art with a nonprofit that develops all kinds of street art with local artists and empowering arts development. Next slide. And then close by, just down the road, a small town, Geneva, New York, created a district back in the '80s with a $500,000 budget. They do professional management, large scale events, beautification, environmental services. Same kind of stuff on a smaller scale. Next. And throughout New York State, there are well over 100 business improvement districts of various sizes in communities of all sizes. Next slide. And notably, there are 76 of these districts in New York City alone, far more than any other city in the country. 39 of those established since 2000. In fact, if you're in Manhattan, you can kind of tell what neighborhood you are by the branding that's on the trash cans, which is coming from the business improvement districts that are there. Next slide. So what do these bids do? Next slide. they really do kind of anything you can imagine for the mutual benefit of the folks using and working in living in downtowns, environmental services and hospitality, parks and public spaces, homeless services, economic development, beautification, marketing, promotion events, transportation. You can see just a smattering of all kinds of different things that different districts are. Nobody's doing all of these things. And that's one of the beauties of these districts is they're very much tailored to suit local needs. And that's why we're here today, is to hear from you about what downtown Rochester needs. Next slide. So in closing, what's the process going on here in Rochester? Next slide. There's state law in New York that prescribes how these things are created, and there are a number of specific steps. And the downtown organization has set about commitment to community engagement throughout this process. The whole process begins with a vote at the city council to begin the development of a district plan. And then there is that district plan, which is basically the plan for what are you going to do, how much is it going to cost, where are you going to do it, how are you going to raise the assessment. Then you have to get, this is a key step in the process, you have to get documented support for 51% of the property owners in downtown in the district that's prescribed, and 51% of the assessed value of those properties in that district. So basically, those are the people that are going to be paying the bill for whatever it does, and you have to document that most of them are in support. Once you reach that threshold, the city council votes to authorize a public hearing, and then they hold a public hearing in which they have to notify that to publicize that there will be a public hearing and notify all of the ratepayers that are the potential ratepayers. Once they've had the public hearing, if the council chooses, they vote to approve and adopt the district plan. And then the state controller reviews and certifies the district plan. And then finally, the council votes to approve the assessment district, which puts the assessment in place, and to authorize a contract with a district management association like the Partners for Downtown Rochester to manage the program. When we get to that point of the agenda, I'd be happy to respond to any questions about those details. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was very interesting. And now we're going to go into a few polls where we want to get just a little bit more information about you, our attendees, and your thoughts about downtown. And for purposes, if some of these questions ask about the downtown core, for purposes of these exercises, we're thinking about that as a 15-minute walk from South and Broad Street, which is where the Central Public Library is. So if you can imagine that and how far you could get in 15 minutes, that's kind of the framework we'd like you to use for purposes of this exercise. And so you're going to see a poll come up on your screen and you'll be able to answer it. If you're on the phone, unfortunately, you will not be able to answer the poll, but you will be able to participate in the Q&A, and I will tell you how to do that later. So our first question here is about how frequently do you visit the downtown core? So if you would please pick one of these choices. Is it daily, weekly, monthly, a few times a year, or never? Or you live in the downtown core, maybe you're there all the time. That would be great. And then Mike, when if you get to 100% response, that's great. Looks like we have 35 people online. We can share the results. How are we doing there, Mike?
We're at 16 out of 20. Yes, 16 out of 27, I believe. I'll go ahead and end the poll and move forward. Share the results.
Okay, so it looks like 60% of you are in downtown daily, and 3 of you come weekly, 3 monthly, and 4 of you live downtown, and 1 person comes a few times a year. So it looks like all of you know downtown, come downtown, maybe even know downtown really, really well. So thanks for sharing that. It's great. And I see a couple people have added questions in the Q&A. We will get to those after we do these polls. So thanks for those questions. The second poll is related to your relationship to downtown. So like, do you live there, work there, go there occasionally from another city or town? Do you visit there occasionally for recreation, like going out to dinner, going to Jiva or the Little or something, or visiting friends, or occasionally for business, or none of these? So go ahead and select any of those that apply to you. You can select more than one. How many do we have so far, Mike?
26 out of 35.
Okay, we'll give people another minute. Let us know, what is your relationship to the downtown core? Okay, let's go ahead and close that one, Mike, and share the results. Okay, it looks like a whole bunch of people, 80% of you work there, almost 80%, and almost 60% of you go there occasionally for recreation, like restaurants, theater, friends. 1 of you goes down there for none of those. We'd love to hear, what your connection, or when you go downtown, if you want to type that in the chat. But thanks very much. Looks like 15% of you live there. So terrific. All right, let's move to the next one. Okay, this is also one where you can select as many as you want. Which of these activities do you frequently engage in downtown? Again, we're talking about that 15-minute walk from South and Broad Street, where the Central Library is. Do you go there for shopping, eating and drinking, working, visiting outdoor spaces, parks, Parcel 5, whatever, special events, arts and culture, seeing friends, nightlife, or some other thing? And Mike, let us know how we're doing with responses.
23 out of 35 so far.
Okay, I'm sure a few more of you can get your choices in there. We would love to hear from you. Okay, let's go ahead and close that. Okay, looks like, again, lots of you work downtown. 89% of you go there for work. I suppose whether you're there for your office or just go down to do work or work meetings. For special events, 74%. Arts and culture, 59% of you go there for that. And then eating and drinking, and a few for shopping and seeing friends. Let's see, and a few for nightlife. And if some of you for other reasons, again, if you'd like to type those in the chat, go ahead. We would love to hear whatever it is that is coming down. Okay. Next poll. Okay, which of these describe your vision for the downtown core 20 years from now? Go ahead and select any of these that sound good to you. Okay. All right, Mike, what have we got for that?
So far, we're at 23 or 35.
All right, go ahead and let's see what people say. Okay, it looks like all of those are part of everyone's vision for downtown. So with the highest one being downtown is attractive and clean. So that's great. And 88% saying downtown is a source of pride for Rochester. But it looks like all of these things, feeling welcome, having fun things to do, having it be a safe place and busy, are all really important to everyone. So thank you so much for that feedback. That is really helpful and gives us a great context of who's here. I want to go ahead and, since we do already have a few questions, go ahead and open that up. So a couple notes on how you can participate in this Q&A. You can either type it, look in your toolbar and you'll see a button for Q&A. You can type in that box, or you can also type in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and there's a raise hand button in your toolbar. If you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then I can call on you. So let's go ahead with some of the questions, and I'm gonna call on Brian and Galen to stand by to be able to answer some of these. Some of these are of sort of technical nature. The first one being, are the assessments paid with taxes?
That's a good question. These are assessments on specific properties for additional services that are for the benefit of the people paying the assessment. As it is, that is an assessment. It's not a tax, but it's mandatory, and so it feels like a tax. It's technically not a tax, but have a hard pressed to convince people that it's not a tax because it's a mandatory assessment collected by the government.
And the other thing I would just clarify on that point is different types of properties are usually ascribed throughout this development process, right, in terms of what is ultimately proposed. And we're not there yet with this process, but typically a lot of business improvement districts ascribe different levels of a formula that creates the tax amount for different types of property in an area. So for instance, in some business improvement districts, single individually owned residential properties wouldn't be assessed. Churches usually aren't assessed. And then there might be a differentiation for the assessment depending on the type of property, its size, its use, things of that nature.
Thanks. And I did just learn that the chat feature is disabled, so sorry about that. Please, if you do have a question or a comment, you can type that in the Q&A box, or again, you can raise your hand by using the raise hand button, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9 and your hand will go up. Another question that we have here is, does the city administer the assessment and collections?
In everywhere I've worked, the answer to that question is yes. Galen, is that your understanding of how that will work here?
Yeah, that is, and that's the same in my experience. It's typically administered by the city.
The assessment, the work is done by an independent organization. The city collects the money.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay, also, in the bid establishment process, how rigid is the plan? That is, how easily is it modified, like services changed or increased or reduced in future years?
There's a district plan that outlines clarity on where the district is, what the activities are going to be, how much the budget is going to be, and what the assessment mechanism is. The assessment mechanism is pretty rigid. Usually the services are described somewhat generally so that year to year, the managing entity can make minor tweaks to services. In all cases, the authority for this comes from the city. So the district has to be working within the parameters of what the ordinance says, and the city will be monitoring whether or not that's true. In my experience, if the assessment is going to change, that's going to take an act of the city council.
And just to speak to the local conditions, it's my understanding that the High Falls Business Improvement District that's located here in Rochester goes through an annual review process with City Council to renew its contract and budget and assessment. So that's on an annual basis.
That's pretty common in other communities as well.
Great, thanks. Another comment or question is, I assume a fundamental premise is that bid funds and operations supplement or complement existing public funding, not replace public funding. Is that correct?
Yes, it's often a key point of discussion because somebody that's going to get this assessment may say, why should I pay for this? The city should already be doing this. And so it's important to carefully say that the city will be doing everything the city is currently doing and that they should keep doing that. And this is a way to augment services.
Also, Valerie asks, what voice will renters have in the voting process? We might not be property owners, but we pay to live here and we pay the property owners who set our rents.
That's a great question and a very valid concern. Absolutely correct that property owners will, in one way or another, pass the cost of this through to their tenants, either through the amount of their lease, or some leases are written so that the cost will be directly passed through. In terms of the process of creating the district, it is the ratepayers themselves that need to sign a petition, that is the property owners. In my experience, many property owners are pretty transparent and discuss it with their tenants, but not all. That's a decision between property owners and tenants. Also, there will be the public hearing process, and anybody, including renters, have an opportunity to tell the city council what they think about it. And in my experience, elected officials are quite responsive to those voices.
Great.
The other thing I would just add that's unique to New York State is the New York State law for business improvement districts does have a requirement around the minimum makeup of a board for a business improvement district, and it does require representation by tenants. So that would include commercial tenants and residents of the area.
Great. Also, with some businesses adopting a hybrid workforce model, there may be few employees frequenting the office or downtown. And has that been taken into account?
Every commercial property owner that I'm aware of spends most of their waking hours right now struggling with that question, as leases that were written before the pandemic will expire, and whether or not people are going to return that space is a key question for those owners. It doesn't have a direct relationship to the formation of or management of a business improvement district, other than the property owner ratepayers are going to be highly sensitive to both the cost of the assessment related to their leases and the need to have downtown be friendly, vital, exciting, activated, so that they can attract people to sign leases and have people. You want people to come to work. Downtown needs to be a nice place to work.
Yeah,
Great.
I would just add that as Brian has shared, and I think we've shared previously in this presentation, business improvement districts are one tool to help drive vitality and really combat some disinvestment that's historically occurred in urban centers. And so the advent of hybrid work and the vacancy in the office market is a very real reality that downtowns are up against today. And so something like a business improvement district is just one of the many potential tools to help work against that, to ensure that you have a healthy, vibrant, sustainable, thriving downtown.
Okay, we have a couple questions that are sort of similar. The one says, there are some in our community that are against this idea. It seems as though they don't understand it or are afraid of it. What is being done to educate and inform those who feel this is a bad idea? And then also similarly, I guess it's maybe the same person, maybe not. Why are all of the leading social justice organizations in Rochester so opposed to this effort?
So, Brian, do you want to jump in first?
Well, let me first just acknowledge that I have a lot of background in this, but I'm just getting started in Rochester. So I don't want to pretend that I know what the local folks, I've read some of the things that have been published, but I don't want to pretend I'm up on the local scene. I will say that the history of bids nationally is pretty spectacular in doing a lot of good work for downtowns, but there are certainly examples of bids who their first notion about what they wanted to do was to just clean it up and not have people that made others nervous so present in the downtown, people panhandling and doing other things that made others uncomfortable. And some of them have stepped much too far in terms of being aggressive with that kind of behavior. And it has tainted the whole industry a bit. There is nothing about an assessment district that says that's going to happen. It's very important how the local district plan is created and how the district is organized and the sensitivity of the organization. As I said at the top of my presentation, a business improvement district is nothing but a funding tool. It raises money from properties in a specific area to provide augmented services. It's a local decision what those services are. So coming in from outside without any local context, it seems to me that we are just beginning a discussion, and it will be very important to engage with the folks that are expressing concern to address their concerns and figure out how we can create a district that will work for everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. And I would just underscore the approach here as being one of inclusivity, transparency, and really a big focus and prioritization of community engagement so that we can bring everyone into the fold in this conversation about what this wants to be, what it can be, and what the vision is that the community really has for downtown that it can help fulfill upon. So we're working hard to reach all sectors of the community. That's part of the community engagement plan that we released last month with an additional survey, the community meetings, the small group interviews, a couple of other ways to go where people are and engage them and better understand their perspective and what they value and want to see in their own downtown. So we're reaching far and wide as much as possible and welcoming and inviting everyone in to have this conversation. And we're excited for the work ahead and, you know, eager to have those tough conversations where they need to be had as well.
Brian, how are outcomes tracked and reported?
That's a great question and an important question. You both want to track what you're doing and how things are changing. Bids are great at getting stuff done. That's one of the reason that they exist was people were frustrated that government wasn't able to get them what they needed, and this was a vehicle where they could get things done. And so they're great at picking up trash and removing graffiti tags and giving directions and providing case management or outreach support to people experiencing homelessness or mental health crises. And bids are great at counting how many times they do those things and publish those results. The good ones also try to set some benchmarks for how do people feel about downtown by doing a regular survey with some questions and publishing the results and measuring how many people are actually working downtown and how many businesses are downtown and what are the retail sales downtown. And so you can track how downtown is doing as well as how much the bid is doing. And there's not a direct relationship because, just because you picked up a lot of trash doesn't mean there isn't still trash on the street, depending on how much there was in the first place. So it's always, but it's the good ones track what they do, and they also track the conditions of downtown, and they're very public about it. Many of the bids that I showed pictures of there publish annual reports with good statistics on those things.
Great, thanks. And one more question that we have is, how do paying bid members typically participate in the bid planning process and administration of the bid? How is the bid leadership established?
That's also a great question. We are just beginning this process, and the very next steps are going to be working with a group through the Partnership for Downtown Rochester to establish a leadership committee, and then doing some individual engagement of the ratepayers and the tenants of those ratepayers to try and reach out and get people's input. Folks that are interested in being involved in the process actively or just being kept informed should for sure let Galen know of that interest. The more folks who tell us what they think needs to happen, the better off we're going to be. Galen, I'm not familiar with the bylaws of the partnership, so you may have to respond to the second part of that.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So we do have a business improvement district formation committee, which has a cross section of folks from the community, some property owners, but a number of organizational leaders of nonprofits and other local groups that's in place. And so we're happy to be working with that group. We'll be launching a little bit more into that going forward. In terms of bid leadership engagement, in my experience, there's typically a lot of community process in anything that a business improvement district does. It's not the government. So it has to go through whatever processes another nonprofit would have to go through to be able to do its work typically. So that, involves goal setting and visioning, establishment of a strategic plan that is a collectively founded item, and then administration of the activities that help support that. And that's all hand in hand with and governed by the contract with the city, the budget, the assessment that has to get renewed on an annual basis. So that engagement is kind of a cyclical thing in terms of a feedback loop of the community and the members and the property owners and the different community groups within a given geography for a business improvement district, and then also the local municipality and its governance and oversight. But there's certainly a lot of opportunities for engagement and involvement, and indeed the work of business improvement districts is really dependent on that involvement and that leadership. There's also the board of a business improvement district, which I referenced earlier. In New York state law has specific requirements, but as Brian said, we're at the start of this process. So what that governance recommendation is has yet to be seen for the proposal in this effort.
Okay, we do have a few more questions. One is, if assessments can be passed on to tenants or renters, how would this affect controlled affordable housing? Would it have an effect on affordable housing?
A good question. And the answer is, it depends. That would be a local structure of, a local element of how this district was set up. There are several things that could affect that. The district might assess housing, or it might not assess housing. That would be one thing. It might or might not assess property that is subsidized with public funds. And then, so whether or not the district would assess a building with controlled affordable housing in it is not yet determined. It might assess it at the same rate as everybody else. It might assess it at a reduced rate. It might not assess it. And then once the decision of how much the property is going to get assessed, then it's an individual property owner, and the lease between the renter and the landlord there, whether or not that gets passed through to the tenants. I feel it's probably worth noting that with the districts that I'm familiar with that do assess housing, typically the assessment on an individual housing unit is something on the order of $100 to $200 a year. So divide that by 12 for the assessment per month. So $10 a month or $15 a month. And if it's subsidized or controlled affordable housing, it might well be less than that. So just being clear about how much money we're talking about.
And is that something
locally?
Yeah, is that something, Brian and Galen, that once you've proceeded a little bit farther with the bid planning process, that the public will have a chance to weigh in on in a later portion of this process?
But public will have a chance to weigh in on everything.
Right. Great. Okay. And then another question is, if we try this for a few years and the community doesn't like it, how do you close it?
Good question. And Galen,
there are actually
you may have to help me out.
Yeah, there are two specific ways outlined in the New York State bid law. One is through council action, which I assume it would be the case anywhere, right? Because the city council has to enable and authorize and pass legislation to create a business improvement district. So at any point, once it's created, they could take action to dissolve it. The other option that's outlined in the New York State bid law is a petition by property owners to the council.
Thanks. We have a few more questions.
Many districts also have a finite life. Some go into place until they're taken out, but many of them only exist for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or something, and then they have to be renewed. And so that's another automatic checkpoint.
Yeah, and there's the annual renewal process locally. So if it wasn't renewed, then it wouldn't continue to exist.
Great, thanks. We are at 1 o'clock, and that is the time frame that we had asked everyone to give us. If Brian and Galen, if it's okay with you, to stay on a little bit, we can answer the remaining questions. Is that all right?
Certainly.
Okay, and but if you need to drop off, if you're an attendee, feel free. I just want to note that we do, if you know anyone or if you would like more information, we do have another meeting tonight at 5:30 at the Central Library in the Gleason Auditorium that will be in person only. And feel free to come by there and learn more. Thanks to everyone who has joined us. I will go ahead and just continue to read a few of these questions. In many bids, voting is weighted by assessed value of property owned. That seems undemocratic and unjust. Will you commit to keeping voting one person, one vote?
That's an interesting point. In the New York legislation, to get to the city council, you have to get a majority of the property owners. So that is one property, one vote. And you have to get 51% of the value, which is weighted by how much people are going to actually pay into the district. So that's the legal requirement. And I would say we're way too early in the process to make any commitments.
Okay, and are properties under a pilot subject to the special assessment? I'm not sure what that's referring to. Pilot is in all caps.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Do you know, Galen?
It is typically a payment in lieu of taxes.
Oh, okay.
So I guess that might apply to properties that otherwise are not eligible to pay real estate taxes. My understanding is, and this goes back to the point I made earlier, the different types of properties can have a different assessment, essentially, a different formula that's applied to establish the levy that they then pay to support the budget of a business improvement district. So I think it's possible, but that is something I would like to check on rather than say conclusively.
And De Silvatella has chimed in that properties with pilots are still subject to levies and embellishments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I should just clarify that, as I said earlier, these are assessments, not taxes. So the way that property is taxed and the way the property is assessed are not the same. So a tax exempt property might pay a full assessment if that's how the local ordinance is written, or they might not. That's a choice that has not been made yet.
Okay, and just a couple more questions here. Will the district include any of the existing defined neighborhoods such as Cornhill, Park Ave, Neighborhood of the Arts, South Wedge?
But the short answer is we don't know yet, but maybe Galen, you've already gotten some.
So just to go back to the point that was made earlier by Nancy around the kind of area to keep in mind when you're thinking about the downtown core, the area that the Rochester Downtown Development Corporation has been focused on for a long time is a much smaller jurisdiction than would include those neighborhood names that I see in that list. So I don't think there's any likelihood that this effort would extend to any of those neighborhoods. There's already a lot of ground to cover within the downtown core and related to the riverfront and the projects with Rock the Riverway that are underway.
And how can the community have a continued voice in a bid after it's established, if it's established?
That's a great question. Brian, do you want to start?
I would say, in my experience, a good business improvement district as Galen said earlier, is constantly going through community process and engaging the community, because basically the district's goal is to make downtown everybody's neighborhood and make everybody want to come downtown. And a great way to do that is engage people and figuring out what you're going to do. That isn't necessarily a requirement of the legislation, but it's good business.
Also, would city-owned properties count towards the 51%? That seems unfair, if so.
That is
I see
not a question I would
somebody
answer
is
to.
yeah, somebody is stating something there about New York State, which I'm just getting started. I don't have, so I'm not in a position to comment on that. If in my experience, the properties that count toward the 51% are the properties that are paying. So it depends whether you are assessing those properties. So a big property in the middle of the district that for one reason or another is not paying an assessment usually doesn't count either for or against the percentage. But I've got to get further dug into local law.
Galen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. It'll depend on what the eligibility status is, but that is something that I also would like to confirm.
This sounds like you're doing what government would do if it were funded. Why aren't we just funding our city government?
That's a great question, and it's a very common question. Like, the city should be doing this anyway. And you know, my most practical answer to this is, well, yeah, but are they? And usually the ratepayers of bids created their districts because they were dissatisfied with the services they were getting, and they saw this as a vehicle to make their neighborhood better, you know, for defined however, you know, they chose to define that. I know that I was involved in one of the very first big districts in the country, and one of those questions was, there was an offer by the property owners to assess themselves and turn the money over to the city to give them supplemental services, and the city's response was, well, we'd love to have your money, and we're going to do the services wherever we think they're needed most. And so the properties in this one specific district said, no, we don't want to do that. We're willing to pay more, but we want the services where we are. So the thing that is unique about bids is they're very focused in a very specific area.
Mm-hmm. Are not-for-profit businesses assessed differently in the process?
It depends, you know, not to be determined.
And don't we already have an enhanced services district in place?
I can take that question. So that's for a very specific area on Main Street. And, you know, the thinking, as I've heard it, is that this is an opportunity to have a more expanded area that would be able to serve downtown at a broader neighborhood level and provide those additional services that are needed for the new Rock the Riverway spaces.
And in 2014, the community already decided we didn't want to bid. Why push for it again?
So my understanding is the last effort ceased because of mayoral direction. And I wasn't here. I'm not going to speculate on that. But the main reasons for this effort right now are both the Rock the Riverway initiative and the desire to see a management entity that can help program, promote, provide day-to-day maintenance for the new Rock the Riverway spaces, but also knit those spaces into the surrounding urban fabric in a way that celebrates, elevates, and really creates a downtown that the whole region can be proud of.
Great, thanks so much. And again, you know, if anyone has more questions or would like to engage in a more detailed discussion, then I know that Galen is open to conversations with everyone from the community as well. And also that John and Galen offer frequent office hours and walk shops where they walk around downtown, and those are posted on the website.
So just to underscore that, the workshops are the third Thursday of every month. Sorry, the third Wednesday of every month. And the office hours are the third Thursday of every month, but that is on our website, partnershipfordowntown.org. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, and Valerie noted that this is a really great point. Can future surveys capture a wider range of uses? So it seemed like the initial surveys focus on people with disposable income, but we also have many people who come downtown for other things like visiting a family member in jail or receiving social support services, worshiping, using the transit center, et cetera. And that is a very good point and really helpful for our future survey effort. So we really appreciate you saying that, Valerie. Thank you. And thanks, Jean.
Nancy,
Jean
I don't want to
you.
miss the
Yeah.
miss the question about Black Lives Matter.
No, I'm coming back to that in 1 second. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And just want to know that Jean says thanks. This has been informative. And then we do have another question, which is many bid efforts have ramped up after the Black Lives Matter protests. Is that part of this effort?
So a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Business improvement districts have been around since the 1970s, and there have been a whole ton of them since the 1990s. And what it's like to be in the downtown space and what the quality of that environment is and how it's activated is very much the business that they are in. There were a lot of protests after George Floyd's murder and other things that happen, right? Very often the downtowns are the city center place, the logical place for people to protest. And so there were a lot of protests, and the bids had to figure out what their role was in that, which was for everybody, it was a interesting time and trying to figure out what the appropriate response was. My sense is the best bids quite clearly responded that these protests are highly appropriate and we sympathize with the causes, but we also are here to protect property. And so we want to try and help people have the right space to protest and also work with property owners to secure their properties so that they're not incurring inappropriate damage. And the best quote I heard is many of us worked all day to help our property owners adjust, and then we went out and joined the protests ourselves because we were outraged. And I thought that was a very strong response. So I don't think this is particularly in response to that, but it's in response to downtown Rochester wanting to be a great, vital place for the community.
And also, why has the conversation shifted from do we want a bid to what kind of bid do we want? That seems very different to what was being said before this started this summer. Do we really still have a choice?
Galen, I think that's yours.
Absolutely still a choice. So what we're working on right now is a proposal for a potential business improvement district for downtown. That proposal will have to go through a petitioning process with property owners, and it'll have to go through 4 more votes and a public hearing by the city council. So it's not a given. It has a number of different steps that it'll have to go through with a number of different public participation and public review processes. So the actions here and the activities right now are to try and come up with a proposal, and then we'll move through the potential approval process.
Can you describe those votes? I think you mentioned 4. Did you mention 4 votes?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to bring up Brian's last slide, but one is
Mike, can you go back to that slide from Brian? Yeah, kind of go up.
So after the petition process, if that is successful, there needs to be a vote by the council to authorize a public hearing on the proposed plan for a business improvement district, also often called the district plan. That needs to occur. And then the city council would need to vote to approve the plan, and it would need to go before the state comptroller for review and potential certification. Then the review process would come back to the city council level, and there would need to be a vote to approve an assessment district. So that's that formula and the geographic area that we've been talking about, and a contract with a district management entity that would run the business improvement district, and that would really outline those services as prescribed by the district plan.
Okay. Will the slides be sent out to those registered? They will definitely be posted on the partnershipfordowntown.org website, and sure, we can at least, I mean, I'm okay with that. Galen, are you okay with that? Sending out
Absolutely.
the slides? Sure, Mike, can you make a note of that, please? We'll send out the slides to those who attended or registered, since some folks who registered didn't come. So last question here, or maybe almost, so it sounds like there really is only one vote. The rest sound procedural. Is that true?
My understanding is all of the votes need to occur in order for a bid to be in place. Brian, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, there are, if you count the vote to begin the process, there's 5 times that something has to happen. And it's all procedural, but it could be stopped at any one of those points. But yes, there is one particular moment when the council authorizes the assessment, which is essentially creating the district.
Also, will the recording of this meeting be available? You can certainly make that available to post on the partnershipfordowntown.org website. So, because we are recording this right now, so. All right, it seems that we have no open questions at this time. Thank you so much. Thanks for those of you who hung out with us a little bit longer. And again, doors open to people who'd like to have a more in-depth conversation. So thank you so much for joining today, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Have a great day.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.